I'm sharing screen, sharing the cam. Everything looks good. Please let me know if everything looks good. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Matt. And good evening, good morning, everybody. Yet another Opcode, virtual Opcode conference, and topic today, obviously, mobile trackers, and in particular, I would like to go a bit, say, underground. We want to see a bit how all this mobile tracking works in a more generic way. We've all seen Mr. Hook looking at a specific brand of phones. My research was more in the line of applications that everybody, including you, the listeners or the viewers, might have on your phones right now. So, with no further ado, I will get into it. This whole research actually started in December 2019 when I read an article in the New York Times. And this article, it kind of uh, shaken all the fibers in my body. This article called One Nation Tracked. And this is actually an investigation from the New York Times. They managed to get a database, a very large database of locations that were collected by one of these analytics companies. New York Times doesn't actually name which company this data came from, but they say that the data included a few billion endpoints. And for instance, the data included more than 10,000 smartphones that were being tracked as they were hovering around the Central Park in New York. Um, you could actually, based on the IDs that were associated with this data, you can actually pinpoint to one single phone. And from there, you can track the movements of that particular phone pretty much, let's say, all over the city. So, for instance, this is one of these phones from the Central Park, and they actually see that it beaconed, it sent this telemetry pings back to the uh, well, unknown company throughout a period, let's say, of a couple of time. And as New York Times puts it, connecting those pings actually reveals a diary of that person's life. You can actually see how they're moving around. Obviously, the points with the largest number of pings, they are actually things like their home, or maybe their work office, or their family, or even, let's say, places where they take lunch or they buy their coffee, and so on, which is, of course, very, very interesting. Now, New York Times actually tried to go a bit deeper into this subject, and all the data is pretty much anonymized. But again, as Hook showed us, that these anonymization IDs can sometimes be de-anonymized. In this particular case, New York Times were quite easily able, they say, um, to identify and track important people. So, for instance, they followed military officials with security clearances as they drove home at night, or they tracked law enforcement officers as they took their kids to school, or even, important rich lawyers and their guests that they traveled from private jets to vacation properties. And all this tracking actually came from looking at a data set of supposedly anonymized data, where every single smartphone on the map is in essence just a unique ID. And of course, you might be wondering, how can a unique ID disclose somebody's identity? How can you actually find out who is behind that dot? And this is actually what the New York Times they did, and they actually managed to identify some of the people, and they show their names in this article again with their permission. So, for instance, one case is Mary Milburn, which is a singer, And she performed for various United States presidents, including President Trump. How they tracked her? Well, let's say we can kind of guess the method they used, but they knew that she basically sang at Trump's inauguration. And then you can just, let's say, find a few other events where she was supposed to be singing, and you just look for any ID in the data set that was present at all these different events. So, um, actually, she's saying that she was quite careful about limiting how she shared her location, and she couldn't actually name the application that might have collected this information. In other case, they basically tracked the Microsoft engineer that, well, he made a visit one Tuesday afternoon to a Microsoft competitor, Amazon. And then the following month, he started a new job at Amazon. So it took, let's say, minutes to identify him as Ben Broily, a manager now with Amazon Prime Air. So the ideas that these anonymized user IDs, can provide, let's say, a very strong shield from unmasking people's identities is not true. And as the New York Times shows, it's actually quite possible to turn these anonymized IDs into real people's identities. And New York Times, they actually go ahead and they list some of the companies who are working in this location data business. Of course, in addition to the one that we saw, there's, let's say, quite a few of them. And there is probably no doubt that this is a very, very productive and growing business at the moment. And I'm sure the number of these companies is actually quite larger. There's probably, I don't know, 10 times more companies uh, who are involving themselves in the development of such libraries. All right, so let's talk a bit about why this might be a problem. Now, um, when I was much younger, the director of marketing in the company that I was working came to me after a talk and he said, "Hey, Costin, I want to ask you one thing." I said, "Yeah, sure." And what? And he said, "Please don't use the word problem anymore. In the world today, there are no problems. There's actually only opportunities. So I'm going to call this not the problem, but I'm going to call this the opportunity." So what these different companies who are engaging in location collection. So actually, just to be entirely fair, would be nice to look at both the positive and potentially negative uses of these tracking technologies. So just let's say a few points on the positive side. For instance, we could use all this location information to identify what are, let's say, the most crowded routes, and then to improve transportation systems to make them more efficient. We can also use this to study epidemics and how people move or don't move during things like natural disasters, pandemics. Um, Testing the efficacy of social distancing, for instance, can be another application. Do all these guidelines from the government actually work? And which people follow these guidelines? Which percentage of the population is actually compliant? Uh, let's say there can be even further uses for this, such as, for instance, tracking criminals or crimes that were produced at certain hours in various locations. So if you know that, let's say, a crime occurred at 3 a.m. and 7 minutes in a particular place, you can go ahead and try to see which phones were actually in the area at that time, and then to try to identify the criminals. And this is actually happening at the moment, and we've seen this happen in various ways, either through the tower locations or through things such as uh, the police subpoenaing companies such as Google for the data. Unfortunately, there's also potential abuses of these technologies. One very good example here can be tracking journalists and their sources. So the journalists, they can meet with whistleblowers, and somebody with access to such data can very easily identify those journalists and then to try to identify their sources and unmask them. This can be used for the purpose of stalkerware, such as stalking celebrities, for instance, or all sorts of abuses, such as keeping tabs on employees. And kind of to just to summarize or to draw the line and put everything into just one bucket. There's a wonderful book from Shoshana Zuboff called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism that I advise you all to buy and read, because it's a very interesting book. And in essence, all this information can actually be turned into money if you know how. And if you know how to use this information, this can actually be turned into loads of money. So, just to summarize, we have both opportunities and risks here. And there's no problem, again, there's no problem with this. Again, we need to look from the point of view of an opportunity. All right. So in March, to be honest, this story from the New York Times, it kind of feels that it passed. So obviously there were people reading, there were people worrying about it, but then, 2 days later, everybody forgot about it. And that is the sad things about these big stories nowadays, and that we see them, and then in a couple of days, everybody forgets. So in March 2020, I saw quite an interesting video on Twitter from a company called Tectonics. And they have a quite very impressive technology, I must say. And why don't we try actually to watch this video together? And I have sound in it as well. And I really hope that works. So I'll go quiet for a moment while you all watch the movie.
We wanted to see the true footprint social gatherings like spring break beach crowds could really have on our society in the face of a global pandemic. To do so, we started with the big picture, powering our engine with billions of anonymized location data points from mobile devices across the globe. Using Tectonics, we can then zoom in on specific regions. Here, we focus specifically on just one beach in Fort Lauderdale during the month of March. Again, each of these data points shown on the map corresponds to a unique mobile device active on a given day. You can see clearly that device activity spikes during the 2-week stretch of early to mid-March corresponding with spring break. No surprise. Now, using an analysis called a spider query, we can actually track movement of these devices over the remaining weeks of March, seeing where these devices went after spring breakers left the beach. As we zoom further and further out, it becomes clear just how massive the potential impact just one single beach gathering can have in spreading this virus across our nation. It can be hard for us to realize sometimes just how connected our world really is until the data tells the stories that we just can't see.
All right. So just as a disclaimer, I absolutely agree with the conclusion of this video, which is that social distancing really works, but the potential of all this to turn the spreading of COVID into a nightmare is there. So, of course, that there's many companies out there who have been pitching their technologies and how they can be used for the purpose of tracking the COVID-19 spread. I don't know if you guys noticed, but one of the interesting things was here in the beginning in this interface, you see the amount of uh, telemetry points they have, and there was about 13 billion telemetry points. All right. After this video, to be honest, there were a couple of questions kind of unanswered. And for instance, one of them came from Colin Anderson, who's a researcher that I respect a lot. And he wrote on Twitter um, a question: where do you get your location data? Are you the first party for any of these apps? And what are the specific methods for anonymization? So kind of, let's say, this question also triggered my interest, and especially I thought that if Colin doesn't know the answer to these questions, maybe it's actually a topic worth researching. So one of the things that attracts your attention in this post was the fact that they said a partnership with Xmouth Social. And if you remember the New York Times article, it's actually there's Xmouth right there in this selection of companies who are working in the location data business. So the things, they kind of connect. Here we go. We have another example, practical example of how the data, the telemetry and location data is getting collected and how it can actually be used. In this case, why not, for very good purposes. Uh, of course, from my point of view, the first question that came to my mind when I saw this is, am I a ship? Am I one of the points in these graphics? Well, uh, is my phone or are my phones actually running some of these applications, sending the telemetry 24/7 to their developers and further being sold through different networks to other entities and so on and so on. The only issue is how to check, how to find out if actually any of the apps on my phone um, do send telemetry. Actually, if you go to the Xmode website, they have a easy to integrate SDK. And if you look there, they kind of recommend app developers to integrate this ad-free um, SDK and basically get a revenue stream out of it, which means you're going to get paid in money for binding this SDK in your smartphone app. And there's no advertisement. Like, what are the most annoying things about free smartphone apps? Those are the ads. In this case, there's no ads. So that's good. And actually, there's a monthly earning calculator there, and I put two random numbers. I said, like, my app has 1000 United States users and I have 1000 global users, and for that the potential revenue calculated by this small web page app is $33 per month, which comes actually from about 3 cents per user in the United States and zero point 0.3 cents for the users outside of the United States. So basically, if you're in the States, your privacy is worth about 3 cents per user. If you live like myself, somewhere else, like Romania, your privacy is worth about zero point 0.3 cents per month. Um, and the good news is that it's quite easy actually to install this SDK in your app. Um, It is a quite efficient, battery efficient location collection software. So at this point, I was saying to myself, this is wonderful. How do I get the SDK? I need this SDK for myself so that I can see how it works, so that I can check if any applications on my phone actually have this SDK integrated. So there's an FAQ on the Xmode website, and there's a couple of questions. Does your SDK impact the user interface? No, it's all in the background, so that means it's invisible. Does it affect the battery life? Well, typically 1 to 3% battery drain. How large is it? Half a meg. And is this legal? This is a very, very important question. Is this legal? And the answer is most definitely. Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, they all monetize on their data one way or another. And without GDPR compliant SDK, we make sure everything is kosher. So everything looks good from this point of view, let's say. But the question remains, how can we find the SDK? Now, with a bit of searching on Google, actually, I came by a website on GitHub where somebody has a source code for a smartphone app, an Android app called Smart Speedometer. And actually, I noticed that there was a small line in there. You see, it is xmode SDK dot init. It's commented out, meaning that, well, he removed this from the source code before making it public, maybe because he's not allowed to publish the SDK. But nevertheless, this kind of gave me an idea. What if we try to find other applications which have this xmode SDK.init in them? So I turned to my favorite Yara hunting platform, which is a virus total malware intelligence. He put together a very simple Yara rule that just has one string in there, which is xmode SDK. I fire up the rule, I waited a bit, and I got 29 matches for that. And there's also 500 other matches for the pro users. To be honest, I'm not a pro user myself. I'm just a regular user. But even in that situation, 29 matches are just enough to get me started. So I took effectively the in alphabetical order by hash. I took the first hash from there, and I started looking into it a bit to see what it does. So this is a an application for Android, and the nice thing about VirusTotal is actually it shows you a bit of behavior, how this application behaves. And there's a bunch of URLs that this application tried to contact. For instance, there's one signal. And I was wondering if this one signal is actually the Xmode SDK, but somehow it doesn't sound. So at this point, I don't see anything in there which is X mode related, but I looked at the permissions for this Android app, and we have access to the find location, which in other words is saying that it tries to get your exact location through the GPS. So this looks good. It means that whatever we found here has the potential to be interesting. So I opened this in my favorite viewer, which is Hue. And as I was looking a bit through the DEX file, this is basically classes.dex. I did search for Xmode in there, and I did find, as you can see in there, Xmode SDK.java, Xmode service, and so on, and then a bunch of base64 encoded strings. And immediately this attracted my attention. I thought, obviously, the telemetry endpoints must be encrypted in a way so you can't easily see them in the binary, which makes sense, which is also why we can't immediately see anything like, I don't know, xmode.com in the binary. But these strings, these base64 encoded strings, they looked very interesting to me. And I had the feeling that they are encrypted in a very poor fashion. So I took them into CyberChef, one of them. Then I just applied the base64 decode, and then I applied the XOR brute force. And immediately there's something in there which attracts your attention, and that's a plain text URL, atbbearclaw.com, and so on. I went there to check the WHOIS record for Bearclaw. There's like who is privacy protected, 500 days old. If you go to the website, it says welcome to Nginx. If you ping the exact endpoint, actually you get a response. So that means that the website is operational and the endpoint for this actually works, um, which is all quite interesting. Later, I did a search on Google, and I was able to find the research from Checkpoint. And this research from Checkpoint actually talks about an Android app fraud, the Bear Claude and Haken clickers. So there you go. I just discovered a clicker that was embedded in the application, which is all very interesting, but sadly, it's not what we were looking for. So I took another string. Well, honestly speaking, I decrypted all of them. Here's another example. This one decodes to udata elephantdata.net. What's that? We can go to their website and we see that Elephant Data is a company that wants to build a better business through big data. Elephant Data provides market intelligence solutions and app analytics to help you win your market. Interesting, interesting, but still not the Xmode SDK that we were looking for. I keep looking. At this point, I just decompiled the entire APK. And one of the things in there, which was called P014IO, actually, it does have inside a function which is called initialize if granted permissions, and this is part of the Xmode SDK class. So bingo, we found the Xmode SDK class. So as I kept looking around, trying to see exactly all the data, where the data is going, I discovered that actually it was going in plain text to this Amazon Web Services address, which is not obfuscated or anything. So everything is in plain text. And I did check in the library to see what kind of data is going there. And this actually can be found by jumping through a few classes: location intent service, which uses fetch data utils, which in the end uses location X mode. And this function actually collects a couple of things, such as the altitude, latitude, longitude, bearing time, speed, accuracy, battery level, then a few other network related identifiers, including the Wi-Fi SSIDs, which is all kind of interesting information, which is collected again whenever there's a location change notification. And by the way, if you're wondering what did we analyze here, well, this is a application that is called the snow day calculator. So you need to input your location or zip code, and then you get some predictions for it. If you check it on Google Play, the people are not very happy with it, unfortunately. As one guy here commenting that, well, he had the app for a while, but then he opened the phone and the phone said that the app was a virus, and this never happened to him before. If we look a bit further, we see that there's about 5,000 installs for this application. So just to summarize again what we saw inside just one application, there's the Xmode SDK in there, there's Bear Cloud, there's Elephant Data, there's one signal. We didn't check that. Remember, we saw it in the telemetry, and potentially there's a few others. But well, at this point, I decided to write a better YARA. So I just took this particular telemetry endpoint. I wrote a YARA, I ran it again on VirusTotal. This time, this gave me 2019 matches and plus 4,000 other pros. And I was able to connect these to about 240 unique applications, application names that are available through app stores such as Google Play. Um, Obviously, I didn't analyze all of them by hand, so I tried to do some statistics to better understand what's inside this application. So for instance, I wanted to see what are the most common strings in this application. So for instance, what we see here, things like example.com, Wikipedia, Google, plus Google.com. There we have app measurement, and app measurement is another telemetry SDK. You see it in there with 1,170 hits, and then a few others in there. So what is potentially, let's say, more interesting is the number of installs. So I did a bit of scripting in there. I took pretty much all these applications. So I did some scripting to try to get the number of installs from the Google Play Store for every single one of them. So for instance, there's one of these applications which has over 10 million installs. And if you look there at the interactive elements, it shares your location and it has in-app purchases. So sharing your location, 10 million installs, quite interesting. So I pretty much counted everything together to see how many applications we have in total and how many potential installs. And the number that I came up is about 500 million installs with a very, let's say, small footnote in there, which is that this is the theoretical number of max installs if all the installs are unique. And in my opinion, most likely they're not unique, meaning if there's two applications, each one with 10 million installations, then there's a good chance that it's not 10 million people and 10 million people, but it's quite possible that 5 million people have both applications at the same time, which is why I say up to 500 million installs. Well, nevertheless, if you combine everything together, the smallest number was over 100 million installations. So I think that that is still significant. So, well, just to summarize and a few conclusions, there's practically hundreds of free and paid smartphone apps which are linked with this mobile SDKs to collect your location. And well, is this legal? Most definitely, as you can see, as you have seen there on the Xmode website. Actually, I think there's some discussion around this topic that in reality, there's no laws which regulate how this information can be collected or used. What is for sure, it is true that this data could be used for good purposes, but at the same time, it can also be used for, let's call them other purposes. And we had just one application there that was linked to half a dozen SDK. And why is this happening? Well, obviously, all the app developers, they want to maximize their profits. So they link together different SDKs. They don't link just one, they link all of them. So that's like $33 multiplied six from, six different SDKs. So in reality, the location goes not to just one, but to many different of these analytic companies. And I have the feeling that the COVID-19 tracing apps will likely kind of increase and contribute this location collection business in the future. So what about solutions for these opportunities? Well, if you've seen my story, one about catching APTs at home, how to tap your home internet, one of the first things I did was to check my internet logs for that particular endpoint. And I was happy to discover there was no traffic from any of my phones to that endpoint. The reason being that I don't have any of those 240 applications installed on my phone. Um, I put together a list. You can find it on GitHub, github.com, mobile trackers, which is a repository of all the telemetry endpoints that I collected by analyzing different apps. And that includes the ones that Hook found and shared with me as well. So what do you need for this? Basically, to run it in an efficient way, you need Pi-hole, obviously. How do you get around the problem of um, let's say doing this when you're also outside your home, right? One idea is, for instance, to install WireGuard, set up a VPN server at your home, and then always when you travel or when you're outside, connect to this VPN profile that uses your own custom DNS server with Pi-hole at home. Uh, and I guess that we're probably wondering if the story is over. Actually, the story continues. Yesterday, Guardian Firewall, which by the way was one of the applications that allows you to track all this telemetry, they posted on Twitter that the new updated apps with the Xmode Social SDK, they're using a new telemetry endpoint, which is API myendpoint.io. So I guess this at some point can become a kind of a cat and mouse game, identifying telemetry endpoints, changing them, identifying new ones, and so on and so on. So I'll leave you with these thoughts. Again, thank you very much. And there's 2 QR codes in there. I'll let you discover where these QR codes go by yourselves. And I hope that this was interesting, and make sure guys do check if you are a sheep or if you are not a sheep. I think that is the question.
Thanks for the presentation, Costin, and thanks for joining us back for. Is this the third time that you're speaking?
It could be, yes, could be. Yeah.
Out of 5 edition.
Yeah, sorry about
we're gonna
that,
start to get complaints, like.
Yeah, people get tired of me and my headphones. Everybody complaining about the green headphones, but I like them.
It's better than most of headphones. At least the microphone is pretty good. So quick questions from the audience. So question from Tara. Does Costin agree with Shoshana Zuboff felt that the tensions between privacy and surveillance during COVID are positive because they force people to consider what they are willing to live with?
Hmm, that's a nice question. I haven't heard about this opinion. I didn't know that Shoshana is still commenting on the topic. Come to think of probably yes. I guess that this brings the topic of privacy into attention, and people are more and more worried about it. Um, well, everybody is pretty much, let's say, stuck at home with a lot of time to think. So this is when people are stuck and thinking about things. That's probably when there's changes, or there's, let's say, positive changes.
Yeah, actually, there's a comment in the chat from Ayman who is saying everyone today will accept being tracked for healthy reasons today or tomorrow to prevent future pandemic. Unfortunately, they're the new norm today that evolve so fast from the past. So there's Yaga, who was one of the participants in the disinformation roundtable, who's disagreeing. Although I do remember that Bo Schneier published a blog post not too long ago where he was saying like mobile applications like to track people is a dumb idea, and that there's probably like two ways that people would accept to be under surveillance, and health is one of them. I think it was Bruce Schneier, if I remember correctly.
It's an interesting theory. Health and maybe security, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is what's happening for the past 20 years, right? 19 years, and it's working pretty well. Jaziel, Costin is the C in opcode.
And hopefully the O.
Oh yeah, but the O is yeah, that's a good one actually. Let's scroll down. Question. Besides swapping our smartphones with not so smartphone ones, is there a way to minimize our privacy exposure?
Well, I would say that well, swapping the smartphones with not so smartphones is unfortunately is not a solution for almost everybody, right? So I guess that there's solutions like the ones I showed. You can try to put together lists of these telemetry endpoints, your own custom VPNs. There's even commercial solutions, to be honest. The one that I mentioned, the Guardian firewall. There's another one called Lockdown. It just allow you to do exactly that. There's also another suggestion in the chat that I see that you could use the eFoundation OS. Um, sure, that's another solution. Again, the only kind of worrying part is the kind of applications that you have on the phone. So the eFoundation phones, they can come kind of empty. You think you even need to install some kind of camera photo app, and the one that is open source is not as good as the ones that come with the original hardware. But otherwise, yeah, um, just think about things such as Graphene OS, for instance, running on Google Pixels.
But not
Was
on the Pixel 4, right?
not on the
It's
Pixel
on the
4,
old Pixels.
unfortunately. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope they port it to the Pixel 4 soon, because it's a good choice, it's a solid choice. Again, you still depend on the apps, and the question is how many of the apps that you have on your phone, be it whatever, let's say Android, iOS phone, even eFoundation or Graphene, actually send telemetry with things such as the cell ID or the Wi-Fi SSIDs or Bluetooth and so on to unknown telemetry endpoints.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing in the chat, like Yaga and Sima saying we need to invite Greg back to discuss about OPSEC to see what would be the best way of avoiding, I guess, invasive surveillance in 2020. I mean, I personally generally use like a Nokia as my main phone. But the main reason is like everyone thinks it's because of security, because they know me, but it's just because the battery lasts longer. Like,
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. Let's check if there is any more questions. There's a whole debate on privacy is becoming irrelevant. It's not. To paraphrase Luke Skywalker, amazing, everything you just said is wrong. So not everyone will accept being tracked, and even those we will want some assurance that only location data is tracked. Yeah, I mean that's it's gonna be a good transition for next panel, I guess. I'm just gonna launch the transitions while everyone is getting ready, and we can you guys can get ready for the transition.